You're sitting on your living room sofa watching a streaming movie, with your phone in one hand and a drink in the other. The image moves perfectly, without interruptions, without delays. Meanwhile, on your phone, a message is loading, a bank notification, and the automatic update of 3 different apps, all at the same time, without you having to do absolutely anything. And while that's happening, 200 kilometers from your house, inside a gray building, without windows, without signs, without a visible name from the street, there are thousands of servers working to make all of that function. And that building is yours. And it's not the only one. There are 14 others scattered across different countries, all doing exactly the same thing, all running without you ever having to set foot in them. And most people using the internet today will never know that every time they open an app, every time they receive a message, every time they watch a video, there's a real chance they're passing through infrastructure that you built in silence. But to understand how you got here, we have to go back to the day when you were still invisible, to the moment you discovered that the internet doesn't live in the air. You were working as a support technician in a small office in the city, a boring, repetitive, low-paying job. You spent your days fixing computers, configuring routers, helping employees who didn't even remember your name. But one afternoon, your boss asked you to accompany the lead technician on a visit to a building on the outskirts. He told you that you were just going to help load equipment, nothing more. You got into the van without imagining that this visit would change the way you saw the world forever. The building didn't look like anything. A gray construction, windowless, surrounded by a tall metal fence. It had no sign, no name, no flag. Just a reinforced security door and 2 guards outside. When you entered, they asked you to hand over your phone at reception. You walked down a white, cold hallway with fluorescent lights, and at the end, the technician opened a heavy door. And then you saw it. A gigantic hall, full of aisles formed by rows and rows of black cabinets, each with hundreds of small green and blue lights blinking nonstop. The air was freezing, the fans humming like a constant mechanical choir. You stood at the entrance, not moving, not quite understanding what you were looking at. The technician casually told you that a large part of the region's internet lived in there, that every email, every video, every online purchase passed through some point in that hall, that this room, without windows and without a name, was worth more than most of the visible buildings in the city. That night you got home and couldn't sleep. You lay staring at the ceiling of your room, thinking about everything you had seen. What impacted you most wasn't the servers or the lights or the cold. It was the silence. It was that all the digital activity of millions of people was passing through there, and no one outside knew it. No one on the street, no one in the cafes, none of the millions using those services every day had any idea that this building existed. And you understood something you would never be able to forget. Real power isn't visible. Real power hides behind nameless gray walls. You started investigating. You spent your nights reading, watching documentaries, searching for information about how that industry worked. You discovered that the entire world depended on those buildings, that the big tech companies weren't really the ones controlling the internet, but rather the few companies that rented physical space to host their servers. You discovered that a single square meter inside a data center could generate more money per month than an entire commercial space in the best area of the city. You discovered that while everyone was talking about apps, social networks, artificial intelligence, almost no one talked about the invisible ground on which all of that was built. And right there, you decided something. You didn't want to program apps. You didn't want to build social networks. You wanted to own the digital land where all of that lived. The problem was obvious. Building a data center cost millions. You needed special land, industrial electrical installations, advanced cooling systems, reinforced security, and permits impossible to get without connections. It was a closed world, dominated by giants, where no one with your profile was supposed to belong. But you understood something. Every giant industry always starts with a small crack you can slip through. And in the world of data centers, that crack was called colocation. Colocation was simple in concept. Small and medium-sized businesses needed to keep their servers in secure, cooled places with fast connections and stable power. But they couldn't afford their own data center, so they rented space inside larger centers. A single cabinet per month, sometimes just a couple of servers. And although each individual rental seemed small, multiplied by hundreds or thousands of clients, it became something enormous. Your first operation was ridiculous compared to what you saw that afternoon. You managed to rent a small space inside an industrial building, a reinforced room with a basic air conditioning system. You bought 5 used cabinets, installed your own electrical systems with the help of an electrician friend, and started offering space to local small businesses that needed to store data without paying fortunes. At first, no one took you seriously. Your operation looked like a garage experiment next to the market giants. But you understood another important thing. Most small clients don't want the giant. They want someone who answers the phone when something fails. And you started answering the phone. The first clients came by word of mouth. A small design studio, logistics company, a clinic that needed to store medical records. Then came a startup that was growing faster than expected and needed to scale its servers quickly. Your small room filled up in less than a year. And then you did something no competitor would have done. Instead of raising prices, you opened a second room next door, then a third. Then you rented an entire floor of the building. And as you grew, you understood something that almost no one in the industry said out loud. The real business of data centers isn't technology, it's energy. Every server consumes electricity 24 hours a day. Every cooling system multiplies consumption. Whoever controls energy best wins. So while your competitors boasted about hardware and speeds, you became obsessed with something different. How to reduce electricity cost per server. How to use waste heat. How to negotiate industrial rates with power companies. How to design more efficient buildings from scratch. And when you finally opened your very first wholly owned data center, you didn't build the biggest or the most expensive. You built the most efficient. A gray building, windowless, without signs in a cheap industrial zone, powered by a private electrical substation you had negotiated for months. And that center started generating money at a rate that would have seemed like fiction to you before. Clients started coming on their own. Companies tired of paying inflated prices to the giants. Companies that needed fast, flexible infrastructure. Startups growing so quickly they needed to double their servers every few months. And while everyone else was looking to the sky, to the cloud, you were building the ground on which that cloud rested. Then came the second center, then the third. Then you opened one in another country. And then something happened that completely changed the scale of your business. One of the largest technology companies in the world approached you discreetly. They didn't want to buy you. They wanted to rent several entire floors in your centers for a new regional expansion. The figure they put on the table was so absurd that you had to read it 3 times to make sure there wasn't a mistake. You accepted, but you set a condition. You wanted to expand simultaneously, opening 2 new centers in strategic markets. They would pay part of the construction cost in exchange for guaranteed exclusive space. That negotiation lasted weeks. When you finally signed, you were no longer a local operator. You were a strategic infrastructure provider for one of the largest companies on the planet. And almost no one in your own country knew your name. You began to understand the real game. When you manage critical infrastructure, you stop competing for clients. Clients start competing for you. The big technology companies always need more space. Artificial intelligence multiplied that need by 10. Every time a new model is trained, every time millions of people use an automated assistant, every time an image or text is generated in seconds, all of that happens inside centers like yours. And while the world applauds new technologies, the real winners are the owners of the ground where those technologies live. The growth became so large that your company began to structure itself like a silent empire. engineering teams on different continents, constant negotiations with power companies, legal departments handling million-dollar contracts, security personnel protecting buildings that most people walk past without looking. And you, at the center of all of it, almost never appeared in public anymore. You had no panoramic view offices, no interviews in major media. You learned something important. The less they see you, the more power you have. And one random afternoon, sitting at home while your son played on a console connected to the internet, you stopped for a moment. You realized that every game he played, every video your neighbors watched, every message sent by thousands of people around the world at that very instant, all of it passed through some point in your infrastructure, without them knowing it, without your son understanding it yet, without anyone applauding you for it. And you understood something you would never be able to forget. Real power in this world has never been in what is visible. It's in what holds everything else up. People believe the internet is light, intangible, invisible. But the internet weighs tons, occupies enormous buildings, consumes brutal amounts of energy, and always has an owner. Most will never ask who that owner is, because they think they're using an app, when in reality, they're using an entire system that someone built in silence while they were looking the other way. And that someone this time is you.